Welcome to Chapter 7. This chapter, we're going to see how managers make things happen through individual and group decision making. By the end of this chapter, you should be able to explain how people know when they're being logical or illogical, the guidelines that you can follow to be sure that decisions you make are not just lawful but ethical, and how you can improve your decision making using evidence based management and business analytics. You should also be able to answer the question of how do you decide to decide. And trying to be rational isn't always easy, so what are the various barriers? And how do you work with others to make things happen? So let's look at the two kinds of decision making. A decision is a choice that we make after we look at various alternatives, and decision making is the process of how we identify and choose which alternative courses of action to take. We have four stages of rational decision making. Stage one, we identify the problem or the opportunity that is presented to us. The next stage, we think of alternative solutions. Then we evaluate those alternatives and select a solution out of the alternatives. And then the fourth stage, we're going to implement and then evaluate the solution that we chose. So with this model, it explains how managers should make decisions. It assumes that you'll make logical decisions that will be optimum in furthering your organization's best interest. And this is considered the classical model of decision making. A successful implementation, we must plan carefully. We have to be sensitive to those that are going to be affected and impacted by the decisions we make. Wait a minute. I jumped ahead. Through evaluation, we're going to look at what we should do if the action's not working. Give it more time. We can change it slightly, try another alternative. We can start over. And so we have to be able to look at all of these factors. Here's an example. Making a correct diagnosis. Who's better at financial decisions, men or women, right? This is always something that comes up. Interesting enough, a lot of male associates that I have in that deal in the financial services realm usually say that women are actually better financial decision makers. But Buffett and female investors have something in common. Women trade much less often than men, and they do a lot more research, and they tend to base their investment decisions on more than just numbers. Men tend to be frazzled and frenetic day traders. And so female investors actually invest more like Warren Buffett. And what more can you say about a billionaire Warren Buffett, right? So at the end of the day, I think you know the answer, right? Who's better, men or women? Now let's look at some of the assumptions. Table 7.1 shows we have complete information, no uncertainty. You should be able to make sure that it's complete, error-free. You've looked at all alternative courses of action. You've looked at all the consequences of those actions. And then from there, you are making sure that there are logical, unemotional analysis taking place. There's no prejudices or emotional blind spots. You're ranking your alternatives from best to worst according to your personal preferences. And then you're making the best decision for the organization is that you're choosing an alternative that you truly do believe that will benefit the organization as a whole and within all the parts. Now, when we look at non-rational models, we assume that the decision making is nearly always uncertain and risky, and it makes it difficult for managers to make optimal decisions. In bounded rationality, it suggests that the ability of the decision maker to make rational decisions is limited based on a number of constraints, and that could be complexity, time, money, and cognitive capacity. So look at some hindrances. Under complexity, that's where problems that need solving are very complex beyond understanding. And we can have some time and money constraints where there's just not enough time and there's not enough money for us to gather enough relevant information in order to make a sound decision. Under different cognitive capacity, we're looking at the values, skills, habits, and unconscious reflexes that managers aren't all built the same way. And so we have our personal limitations and our biases that can impact our judgment. With imperfect information, we're all imperfect. So our information is going to be fragmented, and the alternatives that we bring and the consequences will also be fragmented. And so we can have too much information, which we have information overload, and with too much information, you can't make a decision because it's overwhelming. And then we end up having analysis paralysis, right? Then we can have different priorities where some of the information and data that we have we deem as important, and others we ignore. And then, of course, we can have conflicting goals. You can have conflicting goals with other managers, with your coworkers, with some of the higher ups, and based on what your goals are compared to theirs. And so all of these can be hindrances. So when managers seek alternatives until they find one that is satisfactory, not optimal, this is where you are not looking for perfect, but you're looking for good enough. And what is good enough to get the job done? That's the satisficing model. Intuition is where you're going with that gut. You're using your conscious thought, your logical inference. You're saying what you feel, the expertise. It is something within the core of you and the essence of you, and you're running with it. You may not necessarily have the quantitative data, but you have the feelings and something that's moving you. And so we use various guidelines for helping to develop this type of awareness. We can open up the closet, which means that you're going to what extent do you experience intuition? Do you trust your feelings and count on those judgments? And are you suppressing your hunches? Don't mix up your eyes, which are your instinct, insight, intuition. They're not synonymous, so you have to practice distinguishing between those three. The third recommendation is elicit good feedback. You need to reach out to others and see how intuitive you truly are and the judgments that you've made. Build confidence in that gut feeling. Create an environment, it's a learning environment where you can develop better intuitive awareness. The fourth recommendation is to get a feel for your batting average. How well are you doing? Benchmark, right? How reliable have you been? Ask yourself, how might you improve? Are you 90%? Are you 30%? How well are you doing of being right? Use imagery. So using visual images, visual pictures rather than words, where you're literally visualizing potential scenarios that can put your gut into play versus where you're trying to actually verbalize it with words. 6, play devil's advocate. Choose the other side. Test out your judgment. Come up with all the possible objections. Some of the great courtroom attorneys are able to factor in not just their arguments, but the counter arguments. You need to be able to generate those and probe deeply within to find out and challenge yourself. Be your biggest naysayer. That is how you can really see how well your gut is working. And then, of course, the 7th recommendation is to capture and validate your intuitions. Create that inner state where you give that space for your mind to freely roam, to capture your creative intuitions, and then you need to log them down and do so before they're censored by that rational analysis, before you start to dissect and everything. Because as you start to do that, what happens is you start to pull away and diminish what your gut is telling you. So Bill's been a manager for 14 years. He's seen many situations with his employees. He often makes decisions without really thinking about them. Is this intuition, satisfying bounded rationality, or unbounded rationality? He's seen a lot. He makes decisions. He doesn't even think about it. He just makes them. If you said A, intuition, you're correct. It's his feeling. He's going with his gut. So let's look at business ethics and the dismal record that we have seen throughout organizations. We have ethics officer, and that's someone who's trained about the matters of ethics in the workplace, particularly about resolving ethical dilemmas. We use decision trees, and it's a graph, and we come up with these different decisions and the possible outcomes and consequences that could take place, and we use this to create a plan so that we can reach a particular goal. The roadmap that we come up with through the decision tree is there a proposed action legal? If yes, does that action maximize our shareholder value? If it does, is it ethical? If it's not, would it be ethical not to take the proposed action? And so this is one roadmap. And so you can see here, figure 7.3, it kind of goes through all of this. And so you can see that if it is ethical, is it ethical? And you say yes, then do it. No, don't do it. Would it be ethical not to take the action? And to answer, you weigh the harm or cost that it would be imposed on the shareholders against the cost or benefits to other stakeholders. And if it would be ethical not to take the action, then you don't do it. If not, then do it, but disclose the effect of the action to shareholders. So when we implement, you have to treat your organization as an unfinished prototype. There's no brag, just facts. You have to see yourself and your organization as outsiders do. You can't look at how you and your team, you have to look from the outside because it has to take on approach of the least amount of bias, right? And it's not just for senior executives, it's for the entire company. You're going through all the layers of your organization in order to make this happen. And like everything else, you still need to be able to sell it. If all fails, slow the spread of any bad practices so that you can then come back in with a layered effect of good practice. And the best diagnostic question always is, what happens when we fail? What will happen? And when you look at that and you can answer that question, then you know how to proceed. So what makes it difficult to do this? Usually what can be a big problem is that there's too much evidence. You just have way too much. Or there's not enough good evidence. Or the evidence doesn't quite apply to what you're trying to do. A fourth thing could be that people are trying to mislead you, and that happens. People will try to sabotage you, people that don't like change, people that don't like you, right? You are trying to mislead you. Yes, you can actually be trying to sabotage yourself, sabotage the efforts that you're trying to do out of fear, out of doubt, out of whatever. And then 6, the side effects could actually outweigh the cure. And then, of course, our stories are more persuasive anyway. And so these are some of the things that can make it difficult. So Norma's trying to decide on a new contract for copier services. And one of the salesmen has an excellent bid, but Norma feels that there are things he's not telling her. He's holding something back, right? Why does this make it hard for her to use evidence-based decision making? Is it A, because there's just too much evidence? Is it that there's not enough good evidence? Is it that people are trying to mislead her? Or is it that the evidence doesn't quite apply? Remember? Salesman's got an excellent bid, but she feels that something's not right. He's not telling her something. So it would be C. People are trying to mislead old Norma. Norma's not, she's not blind to what's going on. She knows something's going on, right? So she hasn't made that decision yet. So we look at analytics, and it is a sophisticated form of business data analysis. We do portfolio analysis, time series forecasts. This is also what we call business analytics, right? So it's got all these different fancy terms and names. So some of our key attributes when we look amongst the competitors in this is the use of modeling, going from simple to beyond simple, and using very descriptive statistics, having multiple applications, and there's a lot of support from top management. Big data. This is not just the data that we use in corporate databases, but it's web browsing, data trails, social network communications, surveillance data, and sensor data. When we analyze this is when we're going to take the large amounts of this data and a variety of types of data to uncover any kind of hidden patterns that could be there, any correlations that are unknown, and any other information that we can deem useful. And so we're really taking down these chunks of data and just dissecting it. And so if you're really into problem solving and puzzles and things of that nature, doing this form of analytics could be very enticing to you. Then we have our general decision making. It's going to reflect that combination of how we perceive things and how we respond to information. It's very value based, and we have to have a tolerance for ambiguity. With value orientation, we're going to reflect on the extent to which a person focuses on either a task and the technical concerns or the people and our social concerns when we make decisions. Our tolerance for ambiguity is the extent to which we have a high need for structure or control in our life. And so if you need a lot of structure and control, you're not going to do well with things just casually coming in and out and randomness. It will drive you batty. And so how much and how flexible or inflexible are you with that? So you see here's this nice little chart that gives you a visual of that. And of course, low task and technical concerns usually have a low tolerance for ambiguity, which is a directive decision-making style. If you have a high tolerance for ambiguity and task and technical concerns, then you're more analytical. If you have and then of course you see the conceptual and behavioral, which deals with our people and social concerns. So, directive. You're efficient, logical, practical, systematic in your approach to how you solve problems. You're action-oriented, decisive. You like to focus on the facts. Analytical. You consider more information and alternatives. You are going to dissect. You're going to pull things apart. You're going to consume as much information as you can because you want to make sure that you're covering the bases. Conceptual, you can take this really broad perspective. You consider many options, and you can also look forward and project forward to potential future possibilities that can arise. Behavioral, you're supportive, you're receptive to suggestions, you're very warm, engaging, comforting. You prefer verbal to written information, right? You're very feely and warm, right? So, Bill is supportive of his employees. He prefers to have verbal conversations rather than written memos. What style did I just describe? Ding, ding, ding. B, behavioral. So, which style do you have? It's important that you know your decision-making style because it helps you understand you, how you are as an individual, how you would be as an employee, how you would be as a manager. It helps you to increase your ability to influence others and gives you an awareness of how people can take the same information that you receive, but they end up at a different decision, or they have a different perception of the same information that you have. So we look, and there's some ineffective responses to a decision. We can have relaxed avoidance, where the manager decides to take absolutely no action and believe that there won't be any great negative consequences. It's kind of blase blah. Relaxed change is where the manager decides that, or they realize that complete inaction will have negative consequences, but they still opt for the first available alternative that involves low risk, right? They don't want to ruffle any feathers. Then defensive avoidance is where the manager can't find a good solution, and they follow through by procrastinating. They pass the buck off to someone else, or they deny the risk of any negative consequences. So someone is going to get pushed and dragged under the bus eventually. And then, of course, panic is where a manager is absolutely frantic, and they're trying to hurry up and get rid of the problem so that they don't have to deal with the situation realistically. So they go into panic mode. These are all very ineffective responses to handling a decision. So here's 3 effective reactions. Importance. How high of a priority is the situation? How believable is the information about the situation? That then determines credibility. How quickly must I act on this information before the consequences roll out? That's your urgency, right? And so here's some of the biases that we have. Availability, representativeness, confirmation, sunk cost, anchoring and adjustment, escalation and commitment, hindsight, framing, and Um, so, give me a second. Um, so, and I'm wondering why they put escalation and commitment twice on the slide. It just threw me off. So, there are several common decision-making biases that we also call heuristics that simplify the process. And when managers use only information that's readily available for memory to make judgments, an availability bias exists. And so when we seek information to support our point of view and discount other data that we don't, um, that's when confirmation bias exists, right? And because we only want to support what we believe in, but we just want to dismiss the things that we don't want to believe in. That right there is your confirmation bias. And a representativeness bias refers to the tendency to generalize from a small sample or a single event. So you take one little minute detail and you then do this broad stroke and say that this is the case for all X, Y, and Z. Right? When managers add up all the money that they already spent on a project and conclude it is too costly to simply abandon it, that's what is sunk cost biased. That is very detrimental. Then we have a tendency to make decisions based on an initial figure, and that's our adjustment bias. And escalation of commitment bias occurs when decision makers increase their commitment to a project despite they knowing that there's some negative information tied to it. So group decision making has some advantages. A greater pool of knowledge, right? Because there's more people pulling in some information. We have different perspectives that we can look through. Of course, we're all intellectually stimulated. There's a better understanding of decision rationale, and there's a deeper commitment to the decision. There are some disadvantages. There's always going to be a few people who are going to dominate or intimidate the group. And as I mentioned, that there's groupthink. Oh, groupthink is we've determined this is the answer, this is the only answer. We're putting our head in the sand and we refuse to accept any other answer. No one can challenge this answer. This is the answer. That is awful. And then we've already talked about satisficing. And then we have goal displacement. So you just want to agree for the sake of unanimity. You want to be unanimous, right? I'm tongue-tied today. And so you avoid really assessing the decision. You just put your head in the sand. That's groupthink, as I've already discussed earlier. And then what you need to know about groups and decision making is that they can be very, very, very inefficient. They're definitely less efficient. Size does impact decision quality. They can be too confident and cocky and arrogant. It can lead to arrogance. And knowledge does count. When a group can be very beneficial is when it can increase quality. It can increase acceptance and development. And what that means is that if you can have extra information that can help bring about better quality decisions, then you should involve those people who can help provide you that information. And if it occurs frequent enough, then it helps you to make decisions on promotions and who qualifies for certain things. And then groups could be used to help produce more consistent decisions than individuals do, because sometimes individuals can have a lot of analysis paralysis because they don't have anyone challenging their thought process. When you're increasing acceptance, managers need to be able to involve people who acceptance and commitment are important to them. And then the increase in development is through participation. And managers may want to involve those whose development is also most important. And so these are the three ways that a group can be very beneficial in decision making. So here are some techniques. We can have consensus. That's where members are able to express their opinions, reach an agreement to support that final decision. It's not the same as groupthink. right? Everyone is able to express their opinions. There are some challenges, there's some criticism and critiques. At a point, everything is dissected and analyzed, and then there is a mutual agreement. Brainstorming is where you sit back and you come up with multiple ideas and alternatives to create solutions to problems. We have 7 rules for brainstorming. Defer judgment. So during a brainstorming, you don't criticize. It is a brain dump. You are just pouring everything out. So you're not going through we've never done it that way, or it's too expensive. They'll never let us do that. This is not the time for that. Brainstorming is brain dumping. You just put everything out. Every possible idea. Nothing is stupid. You just put it out. You build on each other's ideas. You're encouraging, right? You are encouraging the participants to come up with ideas. You avoid the word but and can't and impossible. You encourage wild, crazy, out of the box ideas, right? You're reimagining ideas. That's what you encourage. You go for more ideas, not the best quality, right? So you're trying to write as many as you possibly can, focusing on having tons of ideas. Then you can streamline it to find the most quality ones. You're very visual, so you're using colored pens, bold colors, using flip charts, big sheets of paper, whiteboards, poster boards. Everywhere you could be poster walls and white walls and everything, where you could be very visual. In my office, I have a huge glass, dry erase glass, and then we have the huge post-it boards, and we're using the flip charts and everything to be able to visually show what it is that we're trying to do. It just makes the ideas pop out. And then we're focused on a topic, right? So you should have a facilitator who can help everyone stay on target, keep the discussion streamlined and very focused. You're not straying off and talking about your cat. You're not talking about the hot dog that you had at lunch. You're staying focused. You're not talking about what the company did 10 years ago. You're staying focused. It's about dumping your brain with all possible ideas. And then, of course, you're doing one conversation at a time. No one can interrupt anyone else. No dismissing of ideas. No disrespect. No rudeness. Now, of course, there's the occasional time when we overlap our talk and all of a sudden someone says something and it sparks a great idea and you interject something. That's not rude, and it's one of those kind of okay interruptions. But what you're not going to do is someone says something, they share an idea, and you're like, that's stupid. That is just not, that's not beneficial, and that's where the facilitator needs to come in and check that person. So those are the rules for brainstorming. So then we can have some computer-aided assistance, and they have a support system where it provides a tool for analysis and helps you focus on the future. And so they call this business intelligence. And you can read more about that in this chapter. If you have any other questions, please reach out to me. You know how to contact me, and I'll follow up. Thank you.